Our research group's original overarching focus was how does inclusive education support a positive learning environment for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. Each researcher within the research team then refined their investigation to produce a deeper understanding into current research trends and findings related to our stated thesis. Collectively, our research produced an extensive quality of research too significant to pursue all leads. Therefore, to produce an achievable action research plan, a process of discussion, analysis, coding, and categorizing was implemented to establish a key selection of theories for the greatest importance in the provision of an equitable education most capable of raising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' classroom academic achievement, cultural identification, cultural acknowledgement, and cultural preservation. A synthesis of our collective scope and respective data results are as follows: culturally responsive teaching and teachers' behavior and attitude, cultural knowledge relating to the teaching behaviors linked to professional learning, the whole school approach to inclusivity, 8 ways, community links, contribution to inclusive education. Each of our areas of investigation is separated by the individual, teaching, and community levels in order to produce research that is targeted and evidence based.
After collective analysis, two main themes were identified as most capable of providing a positive and equitable inclusive education for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander students. These two themes are direct Indigenous community links to classroom instruction and direct Indigenous community links to professional learning and development. Within a Eurocentric society, developing and maintaining an education system capable of providing a truly inclusive education supportive of Aboriginal Torres Strait Island students seems futile, according to Lorman and Cap, who highlight the essence of inclusive education is in its programming and designing of curriculum, syllabus, lessons, teachers, and instruction, not in retrofitting and integration. An education system inclusive of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander students is dependent on the inclusion of Aboriginal Torres Strait Island communities in its design. Failure to implement such forethought undermines the essence of an inclusive education. Inclusive education, as defined in Lorman, suggests integration, unlike inclusion, seeks to fit students' diversity into a pre-existing model. Alternatively, inclusive education recognizes all students as integral parts of an equitable system of learning and is programmed accordingly, rather than modified as a second thought. Indigenous community links to both classroom instruction and to the professional learning and development of pre-service teachers, according to our research, offers the greatest advancement towards an inclusive education for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander students. A student's individual experience with their identity plays a major role in the development of self-esteem, confidence, class contribution, attendance, school climate, and student reports of school experience. Direct Indigenous community links have proved to provide Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander students with a strong platform from which positive Indigenous identities are developed, leading to an increase in attendance, positive learning environment, class climate, identity, and inclusion. Furthermore, all of these aforementioned phenomena can be directly related to the reconciliation of Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities of Australian society. Direct Indigenous community links to classroom instruction can also increase the accuracy and authenticity of cultural representation. Furthermore, this responds directly to the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The second theme outlined was direct Indigenous community links to professional learning and development. Pre-service teachers require authentic experience of Indigenous culture and greater knowledge of content and how to teach it. This can be also in a direct relation to the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers Standard 1, knowledge of content and how to teach it. Pre-service teachers, more often than not, feel underqualified and lack the confidence to deliver Indigenous lesson content. Direct Indigenous community links to pre-service teacher learning and development could lead to more confident instruction on Indigenous content and implementing pedagogy specific to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island community.
From the literature review and data syntheses, the two notable themes of supporting a positive learning environment for Aboriginal students were Indigenous community links to classroom instructions and the link with professional learning and development. In order to assess these links and their effectiveness, a scaffold was designed in order to evaluate the use of inclusive education and differentiated teaching linking with Aboriginal culture. Teachers need to first assess the necessary and benefits of inclusive education. Although the scaffold's focus is Aboriginal students, past history and many academics such as Villa's study have argued inclusive education is beneficial to all students. They noted how inclusive education extends beyond just marginalized or students with disabilities. Inclusive education is a child's right to have equal access to education as every others, and it is on the school and educator's responsibility to appropriate the learning and education. The data collected note an increase in students' overall engagement in schools where students feel a sense of belonging. However, it can't be used to generalize the discrepancy in other schools. Inclusion to promote a positive change in classroom is the differentiation of teachings and the student's learning experience, such as designing classroom activities that all students can learn and participate. The second step would be having educators acquire the skill in differentiated teaching. The practicality of attaining differentiated lessons reflects the need of educators to acquire knowledge and expertise in their teaching capabilities. Based on individual educator, the differentiation would be the teacher's teaching style that reflects their classroom learning and how the students perceive the lesson. The third step is where educators provide scaffolded lesson plans tailored to individual students or encompassing the entire class to address learning difficulties. These include explicit instructions, more verbal communications, and drawing on cultural knowledge. Frigel surmises drawing on cultural knowledge as enhancing teachers' ability to engage the students, establishing relations and rapport, which will influence the academic outcomes of the students. This requires the teacher to have an understanding of the cultural heritages and the values in which that culture operates. The next step would be embedding lessons with a balance between cultural learning and mainstream content. Younger Porter suggests that by incorporating Aboriginal culture and traditional learning methods, Indigenous students have a better conceptualization of their own history and reality, effectively blending differentiated inclusion and cultural knowledge into the students' learning. Finally, informal assessment can be used for data collection to inform educators of the adjustments. These can be standard observations, artifacts, or the student's opinion. With an established rapport between teacher and students, the pupils are generally more open to voice their concerns and confide with their teachers. The Action Research Scaffold is designed to incorporate Aboriginal culture and knowledge as an assistive measure to attain better student engagement and outcome. Students can relate with the class or content better and are more inclined to be proactive in their studies and take the initiative. The collected data are more of personal use to educators in improving their teaching craft for more productive classroom, with initiatives requiring expeditions, ethics statements, and consent forms will be provided outlining the purpose of the project to all participating students, their guardians, and to contact the Indigenous communities and/or elders. Data collected protocol can be as informal as observation, field notes, or samples of students' work. Questionnaires and surveys could be employed to task what the students and their guardians' opinions were on the class trips. The quantitative and qualitative data are collected for coding and categorized into major and sub-major themes for holistic viewing on areas that require adjustment and improvement. This allows for specific understandings for pedagogies that were successful for greater student engagement and outcome. Furthermore, this provides the teacher's self-reflection on their teaching philosophy and pedagogical approach. In conclusion, the Action Research proposal is designed for future classroom in employing inclusive pedagogy to address the issues in creating positive learning environment for Aboriginal and Indigenous students. Specifically, through educators' differentiated teaching as well as the school's involvement with indigenous community to facilitate an experiential class tying in with Aboriginal cultural heritage.
Artifacts which we use to teach Aboriginal students show that teaching Aboriginal students requires sensitivity for their special needs and knowledge about Aboriginal cultural protocols. Teachers can use Aboriginal ways of learning and quality teaching framework for informing their pedagogy. For instance, on Monday, teacher can use the story introducing the activity discusses links to community use of knowledge. This lesson is part of scaffold process. Scaffolding and differentiation do have something in common though. In order to meet students where they are and appropriately scaffold a lesson or differentiate instruction, teachers have to know the individual and collective zone of proximal development of their learners. As education researchers Ellen Raymond states, the zone of proximal development is the distance between what children can do by themselves and the next learning that they can be helped to achieve with competent assistance. In this way, scaffolding is helpful for Aboriginal students to enhance their literacy and numeracy and overall skills. Scaffolding learning cycle works like first we have to prepare, then identify, and at the end, elaborate it. Effective communication also plays a vital part in Aboriginal students' learning, as English is not their first language, so teachers should avoid using complex words and jargon. Use diagrams, models, DVDs, and images to explain concepts, instructions, and terms. When a student feels that they belong in that environment, it eliminates the prospects of negative behavior such as inattentiveness, disruptive, and inversely promotes the students to be more proactive in their studies. An inclusive classroom will have students that are more willing to open up to the teacher, be more willing to share their ideas, and contribute to class learning. From the interviews, the staff noted how inclusion was not an issue in the school and that everyone ensures the students feel included. However, due to the small sample size, the data cannot be conclusive for every school scenario. In general, not every student requires differentiating to a personalized level. Although understanding the specific ways indigenous students learn informs the teacher in adapting it to their lesson plan and pedagogical approach. Inclusion from the whole school perspective is holistic and influences all the staff, students, and parents. It is the simple gestures such as being welcoming and acknowledging and respecting the students' needs and learning.
Through the synthesis of our individual research areas, our group has been able to develop on the overarching focus of inclusive education. Each researcher was able to refine and develop a scaffold for a future action plan that, based through evidence and research trends, would likely improve numeracy and literacy scores for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island students.